AMD have recently done a quiet refresh on their RX 6000 series graphics cards, and in my hand right here is the RX 6750 XT, and this is from ASRock. This is the Phantom Gaming Edition. So what I'm going to do is compare it against the RX 6700 XT and also throw in a used special that I got recently, an RTX 2080, and then compare these at 1080p and 1440p, as well as undervolting the graphics card and seeing what kind of performance you can expect for those extra 50 digits on the end of that 6700 XT. Welcome back to Tech Yes City, and let's go over the first game here, Far Cry 6, and at 1080p, we literally got 2 extra average FPS. The 1% and 0.1% lows were a little bit higher. Moving over to 1440p, we then again saw an extra 2 FPS. And the RTX 2080, that was trailing a little bit behind. Last generation's used pickup that we got here is still coming in though with solid FPS. However, moving over to Ghost Recon here, we saw at 1080p 167 versus 160 versus 133. 1% and 0.1% lows were also solid across all 3 graphics cards. Going over the 1440p numbers, you may notice that the RTX 2080 dropped off here, and that's because we're testing at very high settings, and even though this was still under that 8 gigabytes of VRAM in the usage, that's what it was saying, it still kind of, I guess, was hitting that limit for the RTX 2080. So the 12 gigabytes of VRAM can come into play here for 1440p titles if you're going to be playing at max settings. And since we are getting 130 on the 6750 XT, it is, I guess, an important decision to make to possibly want a few extra gigabytes of VRAM on your card if you're going to be playing max detail at 1440p. They're switching things up to Shadow of the Tomb Raider SMAA for anti-aliasing, highest setting preset. We got here 166 average FPS and 131 minimum versus 161 and 127. So I guess you're getting around maybe a 3 to 4% boost here at 1080p. Moving over to 1440p, we actually saw, I guess in percentage terms, a slightly bigger difference here, around 5%, going from 111 to 116 average FPS. Now the RTX 2080 was a bit closer to the 6700 and 6750 XT in this title, at least compared to the other titles. Then we're going to stop and pause here, and I'm going to throw in another test here because this is where I did the power consumption results, and here's where we saw 380 watts pretty much on the dot for the RTX 2080. This is total power consumption from the wall as well. Since everything on the system is exactly the same, the cooler, the RAM, the motherboard, the CPU, even the keyboard and mouse, we are seeing that we're getting an apples to apples comparison here, and we dropped it down to 365 watts with the 6700 XT, and then it went back up to 382 watts on the 6750 XT. So you are using an extra 17 watts from the wall going from this 6700 XT to the 6750 XT, and you may be wondering, well, what's the actual difference with these two cards? And the only real big difference I could find in terms of speeds, since they are pretty much the same GPU, is that the memory is clocked 250 megahertz higher at the base, which does quadruple itself, which would be an effective 1000 megahertz boost on the GDDR6 speeds. Though before we show the results of those other 3 titles, here's where I decided to show the undervolting results on the power consumption too. And you can just see here, 283 watts. And on this Shadow of the Tomb Raider benchmark, we're now dropping down to 158 average FPS. So we're dropping down maybe 6-7%, but our power consumption, at least even in the total power from the system, is dropping near a whopping 33%. So the power of undervolting is absolutely huge. Your temperatures, which we're going to throw up for you now on this Phantom Gaming card, it is a scorcher here in Japan, going to 30 degrees Celsius. Even in my testing space here, we had out of the box, the fan speeds automatically went to 49%, got 39 decibels, 60% was 44, 80% was 48, and then 100% was 51 decibels. So the sound did increase quite a bit when you go to those top speeds. But what we saw here with the temperatures, 68 degrees out of the box, went down to 57, 55, 53. But if we undervolted, and we're going to throw this in, we still had those same 49% fan speeds, but 54 degrees maximum temperatures. So this is the power of undervolting. Your card's just going to run so much cooler. It's going to either run at the same noise, or you won't have to up the fan speeds to get those lower temperatures. And of course, you're going to be saving power from the wall, which is 100 watts an hour gaming. That can equate now. And if you add up the prices of power in Australia, prices are going up to like 40 cents a kilowatt hour. That's after 10 hours of gaming. You can be saving 40 cents by just undervolting, which over 10 days, if you're gaming 10 hours a day, that's $4 in saving power, which does start to add up when you think about it that way if you're a heavy hardcore gamer. And then moving on to Total War, here's where we tested it out with DX11. Since DX12, you do get lower FPS in this game. That's what I found. And it does say that it is a beta setting, but here's where the Ultra preset, we got 185 versus 183 average FPS versus 146 on the RTX 2080, stepping things up to 1440p, saw 142 versus 141 versus 105. So AMD, at least with the 6700 and 6750 XT, is roaring ahead of that RTX 2080 in this particular title versus the other titles. Then moving over to Watch Dogs Legions, here we had very high settings preset. We actually saw a pretty similar story to Total War in terms of the FPS split, not just between the 6700 XT and the 6750 XT, but also versus the RTX 2080, and stepping things up to 1440p also showed this same differential. Though moving over to Apex Legends, the final title, I do like to get some Apex Legends busted out and play this at maximum settings. And here's where we saw at 1080p 205 average FPS versus 203 versus 160, then stepping things up to 1440p, 158 versus 152 versus 137 on the RTX 2080. So looking at those gaming results at 1440p, you are going to get a 144 hertz experience in my opinion. 1080p, a lot of the times, even if you don't want to run max settings, if you run high settings, you're going to get a 240 hertz experience out of this graphics card. Though what leaves me a little bit confused is the 6750 XT really isn't much of an upgrade over the 6700 XT. And so what I'm looking at is basically the prices of this graphics card versus the 6700 XT brand new from the shelves. And currently those 6700 XTs are coming down in price. They're coming at MSRP, even under MSRP, brand new on the shelves. And so it's going to be a hard sell with this graphics card when there isn't a whole lot to be gained in terms of the GPU itself, and that it's not offering anything but I guess essentially higher memory speeds out of the box than the 6700 XT is. Though when it comes to the Phantom Gaming, what I saw here was extremely low temperatures, really quiet design, and also you've got a bit of RGB bling on the middle fan and on the logo on the side, and you've got also a quick switch to turn those LEDs off. The card itself weighs in a little under 1200 grams, and the dimensions, it is quite long, coming over 300 millimeters, and then it is a 2.75 slot cooler that will take up 2 PCIe slots at the back of your case. It also requires 2 8-pin connectors and has a metal backplate with a bit of mesh on the end of the card, which the cooler can then blow air through. So overall, I'm very impressed with the card itself from ASRock with the Phantom Gaming. They're doing a great job on that. I also liked the Challenger Pro that we used in the benchmarks here today. I actually had to buy that for a competition that I did versus Gear Seekers, where I built a PC under 1,500 Aussie dollars, and that card ended up performing really well. I actually really like what ASRock's doing with their 3-fan designs, even with their entry-level models. Though I will say, 6700 XT, 6750 XT, there's not much of a difference there. I would go for whichever one is the cheapest on the shelves. I would definitely recommend undervolting these cards. Though if you're wondering if the ASRock cards can get up and handle the heat even in a Japanese summer, then the answer is definitely yes, and they can perform very well. Anyhow guys, with that aside, I hope you enjoyed today's sort of hybrid review comparison of the 6750 XT from ASRock, the Phantom Gaming. If you did, then be sure to hit that like button. Also, another thing, if you're wondering about overclocking, I seriously just wouldn't bother overclocking on AMD's RX 6000 series cards, mainly because the power consumption is going to go up much more after that already high level out of the box, where you can see the undervolting is where it's at, in my opinion. And also when it came to the memory clocks on the 6750 XT in particular, you've only really got 70 megahertz of wiggle room, and when I did try to up those memory speeds, it did become unstable. So basically, out of the box, this card is pushed quite high So basically you don't have a whole lot of overclocking headroom. So if you're wondering about overclocking, I personally wouldn't recommend it on the RX 6000 series cards on air. Hope that pre-answers that question if anyone's wondering, and do let us know in the comments section below, what do you think about this card in terms of its performance and its aesthetics. I do think it is also a very sweet looking card. And we got the question of the day here, which comes from Edward Fletcher, and they ask, don't they use Facebook Marketplace for sales in Japan? Now, in terms of Japan, it's a completely different culture in terms of picking stuff up and dropping stuff off. I've never really heard of anyone saying, oh, I'm going to go pick up some used product from this person's house, and I've never met them before. So that culture doesn't kind of exist here. It's all online sales, use a courier service. And I mean, that said, the courier services are very cheap here. It costs maybe $5, $6 to post even sort of larger items here, versus in Australia it costs like 40, 50 bucks. So in Australia, there's a much more bigger incentive to use a service like Facebook Marketplace, which is like a local marketplace where you go pick stuff up, pay cash or pay on the spot, check the product's working. In Japan, there's two major players. That's Yahoo Auctions and also Mailcuddy. And yeah, different kind of culture. So I hope that answers that question. And if you guys have stayed this far and you're enjoying that Tech Yes content, you want to see the moment it drops, be sure to hit that sub button, ring that bell, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace out for now. Bye.